If you're doing internal investigations, you will have your legal team that will support you when the matter eventually goes to court, depending whether it's a civil or criminal. But you do testify in court. We are living in an era where technology is everything. Cybercrime has become obviously the most thing that we're suffering. We are always on our phones. We are always on our gadgets. We are always on our laptops. It's actually normal. And it's acceptable for a forensic practitioner to move because you get compromised.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to have you on Numbers Don't Lie, where we speak about numbers and really relate to them on our everyday life. If you were to think about it for a moment, do you know that today's date is a number? Even the second that we are sitting on is a number. So that's how critical numbers are. They tell a story. So today I'm joined by our lovely professor to be, doctor to be. She is a PhD candidate, Kgothatso, who's also a managing director of a firm, and she is also a forensic professional. So welcome, and we are excited to have you. But tell us a bit about yourself and what you do. I'm hearing for the first time about forensic investigations. What really is that, and who are you?
Oh, thank you, Millie. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Kgothatso is a young girl originally from Mpumalanga Bushbuck Reach. I actually started my career back in about 2012. I started at Deloitte. I was in the risk advisory division. I think I then decided, let me just try public sector. I want to specialize into public sector. So then I joined the Auditor General. In 2015, I stayed with the Auditor General for quite a while. By far, it's been my longest employer for about 7 years. Went from one division to another. I think I left the Auditor General from the investigations business unit, which is where I started with the intro to forensic investigations. I then joined the public sector. I was at Gauteng Office of the Premier. During the unfortunate death of Babita, actually, it was my time there at the Office of the Premier. And then I went over to Transnet to open a new business unit called Analysis Investigations, which is also focused on looking at some of the factors and some of the modus operandis that were sitting in the state capture Zondo Commission of Inquiries reports. So we're analyzing and doing network analysis there. I went then to Transnet. I thought, let me jump over to the private sector, still within forensic investigations. And I'm still in that field in my own practice.
Okay, you really have a rich history and rich experience. So based on what we now know that you've been around in different spaces, what are the consistent challenges that comes with this field generally?
I think obviously there's a huge difference between public and private sector. If you look at public sector, forensic investigations is more looking at maladministration irregularities, material irregularities, financial irregularities, and also tender manipulation and fraud, right? We look at also corruption. It's quite pervasive in the public space. But when you go over into the private space, you're looking at more of transactional fraud. You're looking at fraud that happens through either money laundering, or you're looking at suspicious transactions that happen in various ways through exchange of cash. So that's the significant difference. I think the biggest challenge for me, obviously, was to move from private to public sector, because you then have to look at fraud sort of in a different lens in between these two spaces. But generally, I always say that, and this is what I said, this was my selling pitch at MTN, that fraud is fraud. Whether I am in private or in public sector, you still need the same skill to identify fraud. So the challenge is, I think, the industry has been male-dominated, similar to many other industries. But I also trusting, for a company to trust you that you will actually lead their forensic division is quite the biggest challenge. So there's an entry barrier, sort of, there's a limitation for women, firstly, so gender-based, but also skill. For people to trust you, you're a young, Black, African female, how do we trust you that you will actually give us the results and protect our company from financial improprieties. Yeah.
True. So when we think of fraud, we always get like a bit scared and a bit worried and a bit like, okay, how do you do this? But for a young person who's sitting somewhere and say, you know what, I want to get into this field,
Yeah.
what does it entail? How do you maneuver around to get to where you are?
So it's the beauty about forensics is that it's in two folds, Millie. You can go through it same as I did through the forensic accounting route, which is your typical, you study a basic BCom accounting or a bachelor in accounting sciences. You do your honors. There's a couple of universities that specialize with this honors or the postgrad rather, 3 universities, particularly in South Africa, UNISA, University of Pretoria. I particularly studied at University of Pretoria, and then there's Northwest, which becomes a double major. There is the forensics part, and then there's the investigations part. So that is the basic. But then eventually, you can also go through the LLB route, which is the other part. But eventually then these mainstreams merge at some point because the practice is more or less the same. You look at financial flow of transactions, you then confirm whether a transaction symbolizes or has elements of fraud, and then eventually you look at an investigative analysis methodology, which then leads into how do we then recover? How do we remediate? What is the remedial action that we need to take? And that is where the law part of it comes in. Then it leads to eventually either asset forfeiture or either just a simple recommendation to say, let's tweak our internal controls here and there. And that's where the auditing comes in. But it can also lead to either a criminal case or a civil case, which then eventually leads into prosecution. So it's a field that puts together two areas of speciality. Yeah.
So the legal side and the accounting side.
Yeah.
So depending on where you would want to start, it will all get to some specialization in it.
Yeah, eventually. And when you have both, it makes it sort of easy. And I know for accountants sometimes, because most legal practitioners are not accountants. Most accountants are not legal practitioners. So you have this field that really requires the best of both. It requires both of those skills because you can investigate a case as a forensic accountant, trace the financial analysis part, confirm the fraud. But when we have to get to the prosecution, when we have to get to the recovery part of it, the criminal nature of it, looking at the balance of probabilities and proving beyond reasonable doubt in a criminal case, that requires law. That requires you to know your legislation and your regulations.
Yeah.
So really, it's for young people, I'd say get both. So what I did, because I went through forensic accounting route, got my honors, I eventually got my master's in fraud risk management also at the University of Pretoria. I did a commercial forensic law qualification separately, sort of to balance this accounting element, because I did not just want to be strong within accounting and then my cases not to see my cases through to all the way to prosecution and recovery.
So does it mean you are able to stand in the court or you work with the court team or the legal team? Okay. I don't know if I'm saying it right.
So internally, it eventually goes to court, depending whether it's a civil or criminal. But you do testify in court. That is a requisite. So you've got to have that strong, resilient character to be able to testify in court because you're the one who did the forensic investigation. You're the one who identified the fraud and you're the one who confirmed the fraud. So you've got to stand there and say, what sort of evidence did you obtain to sort of confirm this fraud and eventually, telling the court why this qualifies as a fraud. So you testify in court here.
So it becomes a game of evidence and really just making sure that analytically you've crossed your dots.
Absolutely, Millie. You said something important. Evidence is the key thing. That's why also that legal backing is also very critical because the strength of your investigation lies in the evidence that you've connected and also that analytical capability. Absolutely the evidence,
So just hearing your story and now you are doing a PhD and you have your master's and you've meshed the two worlds. What is the building blocks of a professional in this industry, especially for our young viewers who want to get into the profession?
get your BCom, get your honors or your postgrad, then get your certification. I think there's about 3 professional bodies in particular that I can think of off the top of my head that then can give you that qualification that will balance all these various elements that I talked about. You can either write your CFE exam or write your ICFP exam, or you can write your CIA as well. So these 3 fundamental certificates, I think they provide sort of that bridging the gap from your academic qualification to sort of see the practicality of forensic investigations. Yeah.
So recently, there's a lot of cases in our country. I was watching the Netflix series of Beauty and the Best.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of investigative comments on it.
Yeah.
So you would actually say, okay,
Yeah.
how do they do this? And what are the character, like the lively characters that you need to really just make it and cut it in this profession?
You've got to be a person who's very inquisitive. And there is, I think this is why I also decided to take it all the way to a PhD. You need to understand the psychology of a person, because fraud, yes, there is a system holistically. When you look at the government, where there is, an entire system of corruption, but there's also an individual that is the perpetrator of fraud or financial crime. So as a forensic practitioner, over and above being able to analyze the numbers and doing that analysis and, interviewing people and getting that evidence, you need to be very inquisitive and you need to have high attention to detail. As I'm sitting with you, as we're having this conversation, I should be able to pick up some traits. If it happens that you are a fraud committer or you're a perpetrator of financial crime. So that ability to be able to read the psychology of a person and understand behavior is also quite fundamental. Yeah.
So it takes a lot to actually say we are dealing with a psychopath here. We are dealing with this at the back of your investigations.
Yes.
But we always misunderstand this profession. What do you think is causing the misunderstanding, and what are those small little things that we need to really just break to say it is a normal profession? We get scared thinking about it.
I think the misconception is that people quickly jump to the criminality element of it. And that is the scary part, when we have investigated and we now have to prosecute criminally. That is the end part. That is reactive. But this is basic looking at financial records of a company and being able to see that there is something that is suspicious, in between the transactions, or being able to see funny contracts that are happening and being able just to see transactions that really don't make sense. So it's all about just being able to analyze, either financial statements or analyze any form of records and say there is something that is not adding up. And then alerting. At the end of the day, forensic investigation is about protecting the sustainability of a company. A lot of companies run at a loss because somebody is not able to say, look at that transaction, there is a problem, there's something is not adding up. So over and above, the criminality aspect, which is, what we see on the news and, the popularism aspect of forensic investigation, there is the behind, the scenes, as I call it, where you are just alerting management and you're just alerting either governance or the board oversight structures to say there is something that is not making sense within the financial records. There's transactions and there's contracts that don't seem to be ending up. Look away from this thing. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves compromised. Yeah.
And the personal side of fraud, we experience it on a day-to-day basis, where you get scammed on your phone.
Yeah.
You then process a transaction that you're not supposed to. I think we need to really reflect on that, because most people are so naive and gullible. What would be some of the elements that we should look out for, especially us who are raising young girls Who you can just get excited by someone saying this
Sending
and
you an
this.
SMS,
Yes.
you've won 100,000, and you're like, but I did not apply. I think awareness is very important. Over and above, having policies, having strategies and fraud prevention, plans within institutions and, investigations and proper robust investigative methodology, awareness is important because the customer does not know. And it's important that you continuously educate your customers. When I was at MTN, because it's more like a financial institution, right? I was in the mobile money side. So the customer was everything to me. I had to protect the customers. So awareness went a very long way into educating the customers. And you have to personalize it when you're in that space to say, we always use the term fraud is not a victimless crime. You will experience this one way or the other, either with that small SMS or with that, 100 Rand getting missing in your account and you don't understand where it's going. So you need to make it personal and reach out, be reliable, be relatable to your customer and say, when you see 1, 2, 3, we've witnessed this pattern. Because these fraudsters are very also advanced, right? So when they've done a specific modus operandi in a specific region and they've seen that you are picking it up, you need to be ahead of the curve. Alert your customers, if it's happening in the West, alert your customers in the East to say, this is the trend that we've seen in the West. Be aware of this. If you see something like this, long string SMSs, please don't click. So that awareness, Millie, is quite critical, yeah.
And who really needs to drive awareness on our day-to-day life?
It's up to a person needs to be quite open into educating themselves. I think we are living in an era where technology is everything. Cybercrime has become obviously the most thing that we're suffering. We are always on our phones. We are always on our gadgets. We are always on our laptops. So it's very important that you educate yourself as a person, but it's also, I always say, the honest lies also on the financial institutions, the telecommunication companies, the banks that we're using to educate us. So that awareness, those campaigns that these institutions hold, let's go to them. I was actually quite impressed with Investec. I'm a customer to them. They invited me to some fraud awareness session, breakfast session, just for a customer. So you can see that they're actually taking that initiative to educate their customers, because sometimes we really get carried away in the business and we, forget to educate ourselves. Yeah.
Definitely. And in terms of controls, especially when it comes to like mobile, easy crimes that just can get you and you lose money.
Yeah.
Or get a young girl who then goes to meet someone who's looking out for something.
Yeah.
What are those controls we can start implementing?
So those controls really, they are very much dependent on, especially for your small crimes, your SMSs, they are very dependent on the financial institution itself. Because at MTN, we had to put in controls for those long strings. And then we had to, obviously put in a system that is so advanced that we are able to track even your cell phone to say, if this SMS comes and you've clicked, and then you obviously experience fraud, we are able to see from which device, did you click from. We're able to see geographic, I had to obviously reinvent some of the fraud rules to pick up also geographic location to say, when Millie clicked on this SMS, she was actually in Cape Town, but Millie is not based residentially, she's based in Pretoria. So the geographic coordinates were also quite funny. And also, fraud rules are also interesting because that's an area that I'm quite passionate about. We're also able to see, but on a regular basis, Millie does not purchase a lot in Cape Town. But there was this transaction that she kept on swiping at Edgar's, Woolworths, Waterfront in Cape Town. What is happening? There is a suspicious transaction here. So to answer you, Millie, the internal controls, really, there is so much you can do as a person. Yours is just to be aware to say, when that SMS comes in, I don't click on it. When that funny call comes in to say, give us your PIN, I psychologically, I don't, I become aware and cognizant and I don't give away my PIN, but really the financial institution really needs to have very strong, systems that are able to pick up these.
Definitely. So we live in a world where we hear of fraud cases every day on the news. We hear of a lot of issues that affects us on a day-to-day basis. What really, especially with your experience, because you worked in various spaces, what really sits at the mind of a fraud person?
The mind of a fraudster.
Yeah.
I think obviously for some people it's a full-time job. Same as you are getting up and every day looking at your businesses. For them, it's a full-time job. And I think it's, the most important thing, it's money. We are aware of the fraud, Donald Kelsey's fraud triangle and in the fraud diamond. That explains, those three elements of intention, opportunity, and also, the pressure that exists, psychologically when a person is under financial difficulties. They've got, the pressure to meet certain, lifestyles. There is an opportunity in a company, the internal controls are not so strong enough. Nobody can see what I'm doing. So there is a lot of motivation behind it. There is unreasonable KPIs within a company, or there's KPIs that should I hit a certain mark, I'll get, this big bonus. So all of those things come into play. But I always say that in this day and age, and I've seen this throughout now my PhD, there is post-colonial era. There is intentional, disruptions that are there to deinstitutionalize institutions and structures. Because if you look at institutions where fraud has happened, it's not that there was no oversight. It's not that there was no ARC. It's not that there was no auditors. Those people were there. It's a matter of intentional, things that are done to deinstitutionalize these bodies. So it's more of a greed and an ethical concern in this era that we are in, post-colonial era. Back in the days, it was those three elements that Donald Chrisley taught us about, that a person has got pressure, they are motivated to do fraud, there is an opportunity in a company because there's lack of internal controls. But now it has shifted to being a moral dilemma.
Yeah.
It has shifted to being an ethical dilemma. It has shifted to be more of an intentional and very deeper deinstitutionalization of structures and deinstitutionalization of firms and companies. So it's properly, that's why now we call it organized crime. It is properly orchestrated intentionally to break down an institution. Yeah.
And who benefits from this organized crime at a larger scale or at a smaller scale?
There is the kingpins. There is the person at the top who is eventually going to get that massive check. We've seen recently with the scandals of the tender frauds, they go up to about millions of money, and service is not rendered, and people are not getting what they need to get. You ask yourself, if there was a tender of 3 million and services are not rendered, or they are prematurely, half done, for the lack of a better word, then who gets the 2.8 if maybe they just used 200,000 to do that road, and it was actually a 3 million tender. So that 2.8 goes to somebody. And in this day and era, we've also noticed that it's not just normally just one person, but there's a network. And that's why at Transnet, we had to be very intentional with doing network analysis. It was so amazing. We could see who's connected to who and what is it that they are benefiting. So there is the kingpin, the mastermind, as we call it, but there's also those, low-hanging fruits, which are the people that are interconnected to the main person. So normally it's organized. There's a group of individuals that are benefiting. Yeah.
And you've mentioned ethics. What is its role, and what are you seeing, especially the influence of ethics and morals into where we are sitting, especially as a country where we always hear about fraud and its issues?
Well, Millie, it's quite deep. The issue of ethics, I always say that um, it depends whether we're looking at it from a systematic perspective, which is the whole ecosystem of fraud. And in that sphere, if we're looking at it from that angle, it's a corporate governance failure. And we've got King, which is the legislation that governs corporate governance, and it speaks ethics, in almost every chapter. Principle 1 to 15 speaks about ethics, so it's quite critical. But you have a failure in corporate governance where you've got these oversight people that it starts with when they want to break an institution, they start with these oversight bodies, right? These oversight bodies are then persuaded to go in a different direction or to look the other way. So that's on a systematic basis. But when we break it down further to take it to an individual basis, we're looking at society. And I always say that we are really cracking ourselves, even academians, to try and, explain this phenomena. But essentially, let's go back to the basics. It's humanity, and it's also the basic principles that we were taught at a very early age that are missing. If you were not taught at an early age to say it's actually wrong to take something that does not belong to you and it's embedded within your DNA, it becomes very difficult for you to do it at a later stage in life, no matter what may be the pressures, the opportunity, or the motivation. So I think ethics really, we need to go back and put it in our, at a school level, put it in our, over and above the awareness, because it starts really at an early age. Put it within the modules at a university level, put it at the early childhood learning. And then I think we might just, get to a point where we are able to stabilize this, because we've walked away from our values and our principles of Ubuntu and basic humanity. Yeah.
And when you're saying that, I remember when I was teaching my students, there was a case of financial aid student who ate the money. Then I asked them, if this money was in your bank account, what were you gonna do? And they all answered, ma'am, I was gonna make sure I eat that money. It was an honest answer, like everyone just felt. And it really seemed reasonable.
Yeah.
Someone put money in my account, I will eat the money. I need the money. So it means we're losing it somewhere.
Yes, because it's not reiterated. Even at a company level or an organizational level, there needs to be ethical assessments, regular ethical assessments, health assessments that are done. There needs to be these uncomfortable conversations that people have where people break away into scenario based, they live day to day on the normal computer, because the thing is we're pushing the business of the day more than we're pushing these softer skills. So it's very important that we have those robust discussions, those robust ethical dilemma discussions, and discuss those at an organizational level, but also at a school level. Let's educate the younger ones, remind them of the importance of being honest, integrity, and being, how when you are taking from one person, eventually, somebody's going to suffer because of what you've taken. Yeah.
And like you're saying, it's also an awareness to say, when you are doing this to benefit yourself, we are losing out as a society. Absolutely. So we have become more individualistic than we should be, community-based, thinking for the community. For example, someone who is given a tender to go do a road, become selfish to just buy their own cars and stuff and forget that this was going to benefit even their family.
Yeah.
So we really need to go back to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
When you mention about the board and the fact that corporate governance is then attacked, and it's attacked through the individuals who sit at the board, then what is the effectiveness of having a board or leaders? In your own experience, do you feel the boards are effective, or one person leads and everyone gets to? I just feel like sometimes we sit at the boards and we know who has the decision.
Yeah.
And we all keep quiet. And we all say, I support. What's your experience?
I'm laughing because that's my PhD, right? I'm looking at, obviously, governance, oversight, structures, ability, and effectiveness with regards to fraud prevention and detection. So my thesis will break that down. So I look at it from an institutional, view, and I look at also from an agency perspective. Agency theory looks at the relationship between management and the board. So that agency principle, theory tells us, and it shows us the dynamics of how management and board, sometimes there is a conflict between those two, right? Sometimes we tend to blame the board and say, the board is corrupt. How did they not see? I mean, Steinhoff, your AdComs, I was looking at the case study of AdCom. I had to look at all the articles and, the legal court rulings of AdCom to say what really happened. And we've seen that the board was completely, blinded. And, people ask themselves, especially with Steinhoff, they said, but the board was PhD candidates, it was doctors, it was chartered accountants, it was internal auditors. How did they go wrong? How did they miss the financial, the misrepresentation of financial records? The board can be blindfolded, especially if the agent, so the board is the principal, the agent is management. If the agent has its own, sort of tweaked mind and, tweaked intentions. So yes, you can have a competent board, right? But it's also important that you establish the agent principle, concept, and you establish the intentions of the agent. And that's where obviously internal control comes in. And that's where other deeper, like resource dependency theory, dynamics come in, where we're looking at what are some of the pressures, the isomorphic pressures that this person faces at the agent to commit fraud. And they become so smart that they can then blindfold the board. So the blaming thing, you find that it's actually quite tricky, because the board of Steinhoff didn't know. The board of AdCom didn't know what was happening. Some knew, yes, and like you're saying, the pressure is there. We know who makes the decisions. You can't now, if the boss is saying we're taking this direction and you want to be the anomaly and take a different direction, but then it goes down to the individual then. What are those ethical dynamics, and how do you get past that?
So maybe we need to ask a question. Are we courageous enough to lead?
Yeah.
In places where power dynamics comes in.
Yeah.
Do we stand to be liked in the boardroom?
Yeah.
Or do we stand to lead the right way? Because as much as we would
Absolutely.
say they didn't know, they are responsible to know.
They should.
Because then they should partake in decision making as an individual.
Yes.
And knowing that I can't just agree on with one person
Yes.
because they are their boss or they are the power in this boardroom. And knowing the dynamics of boardrooms. I've been in boardrooms. Sometimes I was the board member. Then I was like, you know what? Here I'm not making any decision.
Yeah, I think.
And we all know, even with the other board members, sometimes I'd have a chat and say, but here we know who's making the decision. But we need to go back to say, are we courageous enough?
Absolutely.
Do you think we are courageous enough?
No, Milly. I think that's why I say, I think post-colonial, it's become a matter of desperation. As long as I keep my job, I keep quiet. So that courage is compromised because of survival. It's very rare to find those courageous leaders, because you're looking at your family to say, if I go against this person, my family is going to suffer. So it really becomes a conflict at an individual level. But I always say, because it's how I'm trained as a forensic practitioner, I always choose courage, as uncomfortable as it is, because that is where you get compromised. If something is not aligning to my values, I don't compromise. And a lot of people would ask me, if you look at my CV, I've moved around quite a lot. And people would say, but this is going to disadvantage you. Why don't you stay with a company for like a very long time? It's actually normal. And it's acceptable for a forensic practitioner to move, because you get compromised. And when you get those pressures, the moment you get to a place where your report is being questioned and the CEO comes and says, I need you to remove these 3 findings. And you need to stand and say, I cannot. I have the duty and the obligation to report. So I always say that I do not stay in a place where my values, my principles, and my professional ethics are compromised. And that is courageous leadership. But obviously, there is the disadvantage of then you are now not going to have a job. Are you ready to suffer those consequences? Am I ready for my family to, suffer and go hungry? So, yeah.
Sure, it becomes such a nice deep awareness or reflection to say, as professionals watching this podcast, maybe a deeper reflection to say, am I courageous enough?
Yeah.
I'm also
That
like
is the
you. I
question.
usually leave, but leaving also could
There's
indicate
consequences.
not so courageous, because then you are
Yes.
leaving them to be in their same
Yes.
corner and continue to
That's
play the
true.
game safe without
That's very
you
true. You're not
interrogating.
dealing with
Living
the
is
beast.
it's not courage.
Very true, Millie. Very true.
We leave the people
Actually,
in the boardrooms and they continue. They're even excited. They
let your
even
God,
like
they
move
got rid of
fast.
you.
When you say you are
You are the
resigning, it's like,
problem.
okay, thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
We understand that you are
Yeah.
busy.
But I got early in my career, I got this advice from a person to say, okay, not that I run away all the time.
Yeah.
I'm quite resilient. There are matters. I choose my battles. There are battles that I fight really to the core because I've got a professional obligation to do that. It's my duty. But then somebody once told me that you've got to look at also your support system. Do you have enough support, to stand in that type of environment and keep on fighting? Because I can tell you one thing, Millie, they will make your life uncomfortable. They will silence you in one way or the other. And I mean, we've seen in a whole lot of cases, people, unfortunately losing their lives and, but you are silenced or you're getting legal threats. I've been through those kind of incidences where I'm also threatened and people are following me. But it's a matter of how far can you stretch yourself and pull and fight this thing and make sure that you build a support structure that will help to contain you when you are stretching.
So mentioning that people lose their life, we've seen like recently the Ekurhuleni forensic auditor losing his life, and may his soul rest in peace.
Yeah.
So the profession is as that deep. It's a personal
It's deep.
profession. You can lose your life.
Yeah.
What would you reflect on in terms of this? What needs to be done? Like, it's like a question of, we need professionals in this profession. They will continue to face such because they are dealing with
a system that is broken.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one, Millie. And I think, you said something profound. Courage, courage, courage. But like I said, also, to what extent? Because there will be some sort of consequence that you face, either as a forensic practitioner or that your whistleblower faces.
Yes.
So where do you draw the line and how do you know? And I always say that I live my life knowing that, okay, I've chosen this profession. It has its own risks. But I have a professional obligation to do what I need to do and to do it the best way I know how to do it. I know that there will be threats and there will be silence and there will be resistance and, resilience is required. So I think that it needs to be a call from, the top, really. And that's why I had to shift my PhD, because it was just, initially when I started, I was just, looking at this topic from a slightly different angle, and it was almost like I'm doing 2 PhDs, and I had to, resubmit a proposal, go through ethical clearance and diverge into governance, because we saw that is where the crux of this matter needs to be addressed. That is where the problem is sitting. Our governance really needs a complete revamp. And in as much as we can, I've been a whistleblower advocate, advocating for whistleblowers and saying we need to look at a whistleblower framework. We need to look at legislation that protects people and individuals and, witnesses that come forth. But at the end of the day, if the entire system is broken up there, really, we are fighting a losing battle. So that is the ultimate call. We can never be 100% safe. Like you said, professionals are losing their life with witnesses are losing their lives, whistleblowers are dying. So we need to go back and look at it really from the top, crack it from a governance eye, from that institutional SFMism that I talked about, the intentional breaking of institutions, and then make it a normality to practice ethics and to report fraud and to protect, either the soldiers in this profession or the witnesses or the whistleblowers in the profession. Yeah.
I like the fact that you keep on saying governance. That's become such a nice big word. But when you think about it, governance is leadership.
Yeah.
It's the leader sitting across those boardrooms.
Basically.
The leaders that make decisions every day.
Yes.
And where and how are these leaders chosen and selected becomes such a critical element. And obviously the leadership club that we all get into.
Yes.
And in South Africa, the honest reality of corporate, I'm not mentioning any names, is the environment of corporate. Is that when you are that leader who everyone is scared of, that leader who seems to be no nonsense type of a leader, that's obviously that's how it is. Yeah. If you are an empathetic leader who is about people, maybe you are not at the right place. So how do we change this?
Balancing.
Yeah, balancing, especially making sure that we have the right people who lead with their heart. Because the reason we get here is because the heart is forgotten by the door.
Yeah.
Here we are all about logic, business, money.
Yes.
We can do it.
Profits.
Let's just look at the other side. Yeah. And if you don't want to look at the other side, you are standing on someone's deal. Yeah.
Remember, Millie, at the beginning I said something about humanity to say the moment you make it personal, to say if I am taking from this company or from this ecosystem, someone, I always go back to the law of mathematics to say for every, there's a positive and a negative, and for every reaction there is some sort of reaction. For every action, there is a reaction. So there will always be somebody suffering. If electricity is being, overused in a certain area, or people are breaching in a certain area, somebody's gonna pay for it. It's just a typical example. So I always say, humanity, when you're saying the heart is forgotten or lead with the heart, for me it's always about humanity. And I've at an executive level, I have been characterized as a leader who is just hard, but also I am relatable, because I always say the people first. At the end of the day, it's about that little girl coming from a disadvantaged community who wants to be something. At the end of the day, it's that grandmother who needs to get their grants or who needs to get medication, at a healthcare. So it's all about looking at the basics. Say, if I'm doing this, who's going to be disadvantaged at the end of the day? And if it was my son, if it was my daughter, how would then I feel? So then you bring the element of humanity in it. But then the character of being hard still has to be there, because the courage and the resilience is required, because you are going to push policies, you are going to push governance, you are going to say no to the wrong things, and you will be then labeled as that tough leader. But if you're tough but relatable at the same time, there is that balance, because you know what we're doing it for, what is the bigger purpose, and we're pushing for the people, for that ordinary citizen.
So it's being tough for the people, not being tough for the deal.
Yes.
So
being tough for the people
become tough for the deal.
For the deal, yeah.
And I just, as you're reflecting on electricity, I just want all of us, as we're listening to this, to really say, maybe if they were to investigate me, they were also going to find me as a perpetrator.
That is funny.
Because we're all somehow perpetrators on some small little scale. And imagine if you were then given the role to lead a big organization, then you were going to perpetrate at a very high scale.
At a larger
if you
scale,
are saying, you know what, electricity is expensive, I'm not going to pay while others are bridging, I'm joining the club. You are perpetrating. I can't pay tax. Can't I do something? Yeah. You are perpetrating. Small little actions, daily lives. ask
Yes.
yourself, am I not a perpetrator? Because we
Absolutely.
take it so high,
Yes.
but it's because those people who are making it at a higher level, they've been given a higher
It starts small.
responsibility.
If you look at the psychology of fraud, it really starts small. That's why I made an example of stealing that sweet.
Yeah.
When you are still 6 years old, and the people around you normalize it, and they don't call you to order to say you don't take something that doesn't belong to you. That's what happens at an organizational level as well, because the person grows up and saying, but you know what, I don't have a vase at my house. If I can just take, they have too many vases. If I can take one of those vases, it's okay. Nobody's going to see. That mentality grows and it becomes a DNA, it becomes a practice. So practice is also quite fundamental, and it's covered in the ethics part of life. So calling people to order quite early is what is important, because then when you take it to an organizational level, Millie, I've interviewed people, somebody would be sitting on a hospital bed crying and say, but I really don't know. It started really small, and I thought, nobody's seeing. And I mean, this is such a huge company that makes millions. I thought stealing, 1,000 rand, because I'm the accountant. There's no segregation of duties. If I process a payment, I'm able to actually pay it out at any bank account. So I can create as many fictitious bank accounts, for that flow of money. And the bottom line, you hear the person over and over again, I didn't see this. I didn't think it will grow this huge. Nobody caught me. I've done it for 5 years. It started at 1,000 rand or at 100 rand. And now there's still 1,000,000. And you have to interrogate this person and say, how did it happen? It's fraud. And tell them it's fraud.
And it really feels sad when you're watching and you're thinking, shame, man, but that
Yeah.
small little voice, maybe you are listening to this podcast to remind
Like,
you
am I not
of
guilty?
those small little things that you're doing,
Yeah.
and you really cannot
Yeah.
tie up
Yeah.
to some form of good.
Yeah.
So at the core of investigations and forensic investigation as a career or as a profession, it's the perpetrator. Am I right? Or obviously the perpetrator can be individual or can be an organized exercise.
Yes, so it can be a group of individuals. It can be that individual person. So it's the evidence that points you to those 4 elements of fraud. Was there intention? Was there a misinterpretation? And it goes further, when you look at the definition of fraud, to say, was there actual or potential prejudice? Did somebody suffer a loss? At the beginning, it talks about the unlawfulness, which we obviously can, take away when we look at fraud. And that's why we need that legal backing, because when we go into court, and you have to prove those 4 elements. Was there an unlawful act that is intentional? Was there misinterpretation, or rather misrepresentation? Was there prejudice or actual prejudice? Did somebody suffer when that act was conducted? So those 4 elements or dynamics, as I call it, it goes back to that individual at the end of the day. What was this person thinking? Because you've got to prove intention, which is very, very difficult to prove. You've got to prove. And also, when I personally interrogate an investigation report, I will never sign quality on an investigation report where you're not proving the element of intention, because should it end up in court, it will fail. So you've got to prove intention, and intention is a psychological thing. Was this person intentional when they were actually doing this? Was there that, actual, need and desperation to actually want to do this thing? And then the misinterpretation, obviously, and the laws and etc. and the prejudice. Yeah.
Interesting. So we are on Numbers Don't Lie.
Yeah.
What are the numbers that you can share with us around this profession, whether it's the losses that we experience and we lose in billions of rands? I just want people to know that we are on Numbers Don't Lie.
On Numbers Don't Lie. Millie, it's a loss, yes, financially, for companies, for individuals, for the entire system, for the entire country, for the entire continent. Because ultimately, when you look at the economic side of it, for developing countries, having huge numbers such as billions and millions of rands being lost, it's a serious economical challenge to development. It's a threat to development. It's a threat for these organizations, such as your big, like your Transnet, sorry to be calling names, and, these SOEs that are suffering this fraud. The GDP eventually, takes a knock. So developmental economics, obviously the country doesn't grow in other aspects. There's, more social, dilemmas that we're facing, unemployment increase. So there is a bigger, element to it, and the numbers are truly massive, both at an individual, organizational level, and holistically in the entire ecosystem.
Okay, so then in terms of looking into where this profession is, what can a person do to future-proof themselves if they want to join this profession? What is the direction of where this profession is going, obviously with your experience, as we wrap up?
Yeah. I think really, I always say, and I'm maybe quite, I hope your viewers don't fight with me on this. I always say, really, it's not for everyone. If you've got interest in this profession, let there be a bigger driver behind why you want to do this. Because if you're looking at it from maybe a financial point of view, really it's gonna hit you at some point, because there is disadvantages associated with the profession. Are you ready to face those consequential circumstances or instances that come, the price that we are paying associated with this profession? What is going to keep you up at night on a daily basis, and what is the one thing that will keep you going when you face those circumstances? So I think it's very important for people who want to go into this profession, have that open conversation with yourself, and say, why am I doing this? What is the bigger plan? What is the bigger purpose? What am I trying to achieve? Will I stand, the test of time?
And holistically, what would you leave our listeners with?
Sure. Just generally or within forensics. I think I'm a very spiritual person, very religious, in nature, looking at my upbringing and looking also at the church that I go to. And I had a career, I was a keynote speaker at church the other day, and I encouraged the younger generation and the students to say, choose courage over comfort. Okay. So that is what I would leave you.
So just choose courage over comfort. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe, and just know that I'm dressed by Wansati brand. So look us up. Thank you so much, and Lord, may you help us number our days so that we gain understanding. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Millie, for inviting me.